My neighbor literally just decided to mow his yard, so I'm sorry if you can hear a lawnmower in the background. It's out of my control. Hi, welcome back. It has been a little while. It's been like 4 months, I think, since I last posted a video, and I'm sorry that I disappeared for so long. As you may or may not recall, in February, I started a new job, and I basically just went through a weird transition when I started this new job of getting in sort of like a new routine, and I didn't have a lot of time or energy outside of this transition to do things that I like to do. And then it was kind of nice to just have a little bit of a break, a little bit of a step away from YouTube for a little while. But honestly, the last couple of weeks, I've been feeling the inklings to start making videos again. And I really missed this platform. I started posting on Instagram again. I started posting some TikToks again. And so I decided that naturally the next step was to make a YouTube video and come back to the Lindsay Reads channel. I felt like the best way to come back to YouTube after such a long break was to sort of wrap up, talk about everything that I read over the course of the last 4 months. But I read 60 books between March and June. So that's a lot of books to talk about. And I honestly haven't felt super strongly about the majority of those 60 books. So I don't want to talk about every single book that I read over the last 4 months. It's just not going to be a fun video for you to watch. It wouldn't be a fun video for me to film. So we're not doing that. Instead, I've sort of just picked the highlights of the last 4 months, and I'm going to talk about those books. So either they were like really high highs, really low lows, some books that I had some high expectations for that let me down, or some books that I had no expectations for that really surprised me. And so in this video, we're going to talk about 20-ish books that I read over the course of the last few months, from March to June. I'm going to just jump right in. I'm going to get on with the reviewing books, and I'm going to talk about them in the order that I read them. So I'm going to start with some of the books that I read in March and work my way to June, and it's going to be a good time. I'm not going to categorize these by the month that I read them because I honestly don't remember for most of them, but I do remember that the very first book I read in the month of March was Redemptor by Jordan Ifueko. This is the second and final book in the Raybearer duology. This is a YA fantasy story inspired by West African folklore mythology. It follows a girl named Tarisai, who in the first book is sent to the court to befriend the prince. She is tasked by her mother to get close to him and then to kill him, and through some circumstances she ends up learning a lot more about herself along the way, learning a lot more about this world. I read the first book last year, and I knew that I wanted to get into the second book pretty quickly. I didn't want to wait too long because I didn't want to forget what I read in the first book, and I really enjoyed it. The first book is very much like politics focused, character focused, setting up this whole world, and the second book is much more action-packed, which I really appreciated. I think it was a nice contrast to the first book. I really enjoyed the fast-paced nature of this writing style. I liked the sort of plot. I liked the journey that Tarisai went on. I just really found this book to be incredibly compelling. I think it's a really strong YA fantasy duology. It's a little bit different than the standard YA fantasy, I think. And so if you're looking for something that is a little bit different, that has some really great mythology, folklore, fantasy elements, then I would definitely recommend the Raybearer duology. Next up, I read I Have Some Questions for You by Rebecca Makkai. This is an adult mystery, literary mystery. I'm using the word literary in a very loose term. It's about a woman who is a very successful true crime podcaster, and at the beginning of the book she is asked to come back to her alma mater, which was a boarding school in Vermont or New Hampshire, somewhere around in New England. She's asked to come back as sort of a guest lecturer for a couple of weeks to teach a podcasting course, and it brings up a lot of memories that she has of her time at this school. When she was a junior, her roommate was killed and a man was convicted of the crime, and she has spent the last 10 years believing that there was more to this girl's death than was originally released, and she starts to think that maybe this man might have been innocent. And so she takes the opportunity to come teach this podcasting class and also do some digging, do some research, some investigating about this death that occurred. I was really looking forward to this book because it had gotten some really great reviews. I had seen basically nothing but 5-star reviews for it. And when I actually read it, I feel like I read a different book than everybody else because there was not a lot of great things about this book. It felt like the author really was trying to do something to make some statements, some political statements. A lot of things were said, but everything about this book was so surface level. I felt like every idea that she touched on was so basic, and just anybody with like common knowledge of feminism would be able to, or would already know the points that the author was trying to make in this book. The writing was not very good. The mystery was so half-baked, and the only character that really gets any kind of like growth or development in the book is the main character, and even she doesn't get that much growth. There are hardly any side characters that are memorable. I only remember so much about this book because I had such a bad experience with it. Like, it just let me down so much that I would not recommend it. I can't believe that so many people love this book because there's not a lot of good things about it. Moving on to something that I did enjoy, I read the entirety of the Ember and the Ashes series by Sabaa Tahir. I have previously read An Ember in the Ashes twice. I read it, I think originally in like 2014, and then I read it again in I think like 2018, 2019 with the intention of continuing on with the series, but I never got around to doing that. And I decided that this was the year that I was going to read that series, and I really had a good time with the series. This follows two characters, Laia and Elias. They are in two different classes of people in this kingdom. Laia is a slave, and she, at the beginning of the first book, is sold into slavery to this military academy where Elias is a soldier, or like training to be a soldier. In the first book, Elias is in the trials to become the new emperor of the kingdom. He has to fight to survive, but he feels very strongly that the kingdom that they live in is bad, and he doesn't agree with a lot of their ideals and philosophies, and so he is sort of looking for a way out, and he meets Laia and they team up. More characters come in. We get more POV characters throughout the series, and I just had a lot of fun with it. I really liked the relationship between Laia and Elias. I felt like it progressed in a really natural way. There were some ups and downs. There were moments where I was just heartbroken by what was happening. There were lots of little reveals and characters and relationships to get really invested in, and so I just had a good time reading it. If you're looking for a fun YA fantasy series, then I would definitely recommend checking out the Ember in the Ashes series because it was really fun. I mean, I had a good time while I was reading it, so would definitely recommend that. I guess I'm just sticking with the fantasy for now. The next book I'm going to talk about is The Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin. This is the second book in the Broken Earth trilogy, the first book being the 5th season, which is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time. I don't know why it took me so long to get around to reading book 2, but I loved this so much. This series follows a group of characters. The main character is a origin named Essun, and in the first book you find out that, or you learn that origins are sort of this like looked down upon species of people who can control the movement of tectonic plates. This world is broken up by seasons. A season is essentially like the end of the world, and then a new time will start where the world will rebuild. The first book opens up with a season occurring. So from there, we sort of learn more about this world, these characters, the magic, the types of people that exist. This second book sort of builds on what we learn in the first book. We get to learn more about like what causes seasons and how to stop them. It opens up so much about the world, the characters, everything. I will say that I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first one, just because there's this like element of the first book that can't be replicated. I don't want to spoil anything, but there's like this element of the first book that once it's revealed, you can't do that again. And so I found myself like not as connected to the second book just because I did love that so much about the first book, but I really enjoyed all the new characters that we meet and get to know in the second book. I really enjoyed getting to learn more about Essun and about seasons in general, and I'm definitely going to read book 3 before the end of the year. I definitely don't want to finish 2023 not having finished this trilogy. Next up, I went through a bit of a romance reading era. I think I spent the majority of the month of May reading romance, and so I have a few that I'm gonna highlight. I didn't really love most of what I read, and I don't have a lot of strong opinions about most of what I read, but I do have a few that I have some strong opinions about, so I'm gonna talk about those. First of those being Every Summer After by Carly Fortune. This is a really popular book on the bookish internet in general, especially on TikTok. It was compared to Love in Other Words by Christina Lauren, which is one of my favorite romance books that I've ever read. So I bought it, and then I saw a bunch of negative reviews for it, and so I put it off. But I finally got around to reading it this year, and it was fine. This follows a woman named Percy who, when she was a kid, she went to this lake house every summer, and she formed a bond, a connection with two brothers that live next door to her. She has a relationship with one of them, obviously, and then something happens. They have a bit of a falling out, and many years later, she is returning to this town because the mother of these two boys that she was friends with has passed away. A lot of the feelings and memories and all of that come to the surface, and Percy has to confront and face everything that happened all those years ago and figure out how she can live a happy, healthy life. It is very similar to Love in Other Words. In fact, there were some moments in this, like beat for beat, hit that book. So I didn't find it to be like all that surprising. I didn't find it to be like all that compelling. I was definitely not super invested in these relationships. It did feel a little bit toxic. The like big reveal of what caused the falling out was not all that surprising. I did find it like a really readable book, and I definitely see the appeal of it, and I would recommend it if you're looking for kind of like an easy breezy summer romance. It just like wasn't like the most amazing thing that I've ever read. I definitely enjoy Love in Other Words more, and I would recommend that one over this one every day of the week. But I didn't hate this by any means. I didn't think it was horrible. I just wanted more from it. I expected a little bit more from it. I think I will give Carly Fortune another try, just because I did enjoy the writing style for the most part. Next, I was kind of in a historical romance mood, so I ended up binging the first 4 books in the Regency Vows series by Martha Waters. The first book is To Have and to Hoax, which is about this couple who've been married for 5 years, and 1 year into their incredibly happy, love-filled marriage, they have a falling out that leads them to not speak to each other for 4 years. At the beginning of the book, the wife receives a letter from the husband's friend who tells her that he has been in a riding accident and that she should come right away to his bedside. And then when she gets there, she finds out that he's not hurt at all. He is totally fine. He's up and around. And so she plots a scheme to get back at him by pretending to be sick. And they have this miscommunication situation that goes on for the entire book, but is honestly really fun and charming, and I loved it. I had so much fun reading this first book that I got so invested in this relationship, in these characters. I loved like their banter, the back and forth. I loved it so much that I immediately wanted to jump into the rest of the series. So I ended up buying I listened to this on audio, but then I bought all 4 of the books that are currently out in this series. So I read To Love and to Loathe, To Marry and to Meddle, and To Swoon and to Spar. These are companions. They follow a group of friends who all get into some love misadventures. And I loved the series so much. Like I said, I read the first book. I loved it so much that I bought the other 4, or the other 3. I bought all 4 of them. And then I found out that actually there's going to be a 5th one that is coming out in 2024. And so I knew that I wanted to own them, have them on my shelf so that I could reread them. The first book is absolutely my favorite. It honestly goes in order, like 1 to 4, like this is my favorite, this is my least favorite of the 4, but I still really love the series. I think it's so much fun. It's a little different and silly, but just a blast to read, and I'm so excited to read book 5. It's sort of in the same camp for me as the Girl Meets Duke series by Tessa Dare. I really love that series, and this is sort of like on par for me. Like, these are books that I will revisit over and over when I just need to have a good time, and I'm glad that I read them. Moving back into the fantasy space, I finally read The Atlas Six by Olivia Blake. This is an incredibly hyped, popular book on the bookish internet, and I'm like 2 years late to the party. This follows a group of 6 magicians who get invited to join the Alexandrian Society, which is basically just this group of people who are charged with protecting the Library of Alexandria. They find out at the beginning of the book that only 5 of them are going to be inducted into the society. So they spend the entire year at this school getting to know each other and protecting each other, but also knowing that at the end of the year, one of them is not going to be there anymore. As the book goes on, we find out that the society is much more complicated than we're led to believe, that the characters are led to believe, and you just sort of get like wrapped up in the lives of all 6 of these people and how their relationships sort of develop and what's going to happen in the future. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really fun, dark academia sort of story. I was really invested in almost every single character. Like, I cared about all of their stories. I wanted to know their backstories. I wanted to learn more about them. I wanted to be friends with them. I understand the hype, and I'm glad that I read it. I have the second book. I bought the second book not too long after I finished this, but I'm gonna wait a little bit longer to read it just because the third and final book doesn't come out until January. But yeah, I really enjoyed this. I'm sure that you've already read this if you're gonna read this, so you probably don't need me recommending it. But if you haven't read it and you're looking for a really fun fantasy dark academia sort of story, then I would give The Atlas 6 a go because I really enjoyed it. And finally, I'm going to talk about an entire trilogy that I read in June, and that is the Dreamer trilogy by Maggie Stiefvater. This is the trilogy continuation of the Raven Boys, which is one of my favorite, one of my all-time favorite YA fantasy series, or one of my favorite series in general. I have been putting off continuing on and reading the Dreamer trilogy for a while just because I loved the Raven Boys so much. And I, first of all, wanted all 3 of the books to be out, but also I was scared that I wouldn't enjoy these nearly as much. This trilogy follows my favorite character from the Raven Boys series, and so I had a lot of really high expectations, and I was really nervous, but I decided that I wanted to reread the Raven Boys, and I figured if I was already rereading the Raven Boys in June, I might as well just keep going and read the Dreamer trilogy finally, and so I did that. Ultimately, I did really enjoy this trilogy. I had a lot of fun reading from these perspectives. This primarily follows Ronan Lynch, but it also follows his brothers, Declan and Matthew, and then we get introduced to a couple of new characters that we also follow. This primarily focuses on the dream magic that Ronan has in the Raven cycle, but it expands on it by a lot, and so we get to learn more about how dreams work and how dreaming works. Overall, I did really enjoy it. It's really fast-paced, action-packed. I was invested from pretty much page 1 all the way to the very last page of the 3rd book, which I'm glad about. This does not live up to the Raven cycle for me. I don't think anything could live up to the Raven cycle for me, although I am a little bit disappointed that a series that follows my favorite character from that series didn't rank a little higher. I will say that I feel like a lot of the canon things that she set up in the Raven cycle were sort of challenged and different in this series. I think that she aimed to expand the world a lot more, and obviously the Raven cycle sets up this magic system, this world that could be expanded on exponentially. I feel like she undid a lot of what we learned in the original series in this trilogy, which I think is fine. Ultimately, I think is fine. I don't think anything that happened in this trilogy takes away from the original series, and I don't think anything that we learn is just so outrageously out of the box for the Raven cycle. But there were just some things that I'm like, we got to know these characters and this world in a certain way, and this trilogy kind of just undoes some of that. Of course, it takes place several years after the end of the Raven cycle, so these characters have grown and changed, and they're different. They're not who they were at the beginning of the Raven Boys, and that's okay. Ultimately, I did like this. I do think that the Raven cycle for me is a series that is compulsively rereadable. I could reread that series every couple of years and be completely happy and love it just as much as the very first time I read it. This series is not a series that I could see myself rereading quite as often just because I didn't love it as much. I will say that the epilogue at the end of Grey Warren could easily have pushed this up a whole star rating if I was basing my rating solely on an epilogue, because it was everything that you could possibly want in an epilogue to a now 7-book series. I would recommend it if you have read the Raven cycle and you want more of the characters and the world. Then give the Dreamer trilogy a go. Just go into it knowing that it's not going to be quite like the Raven cycle. The world is much bigger than Henrietta, Virginia, and that's okay. So those are all the books that I want to talk about in this video. Those are sort of my highs and lows, the highlights of the last couple of months. Overall, even though I don't have a lot of books that I just absolutely loved, I did have a pretty decent reading time. I read a lot and I got a lot of things off of my TBR, and I enjoyed, there wasn't anything that I just outright hated, which is great. I just want some 5-star reads. I just want to feel inspired and love books again. I would really love some recommendations for some books that you've read this year that you just absolutely love and would recommend to anybody. Something that just would kind of pull me out of this slump that I've been in. I just need to love something. And so recommend me like your favorite book that you've read so far this year. I really appreciate you sticking around. If you have stuck around for the last 4 months, I'm hoping not to make any kind of like big long disappearances again. I just kind of needed a break. I ended up needing a break more than I thought I did. And so I'm glad that I took that, but I'm really excited to be back. So hopefully more videos will follow and it will be a good time. Let me know down in the comments if you read any of the books that I mentioned in this video and what you thought about them. Do you have similar or different opinions to me? I'd really love to know, especially on the books that I didn't love as much. I would really love to know, like, if you did love them, what made you love them? And please, seriously, recommend me some books down in the comments. I'm dying. I need some books. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and I will hopefully see you again very soon. Bye!